So hopefully you can see my screen now. So we're going to basically talk about common beliefs about trans people that are, shared in media or that have been shared with me by numerous people in discussion. And we're going to take a pretty nonpartisan approach. I'm not going to say we won't agree with one of the two parties more than the other, but I'm going to say that what I present is based on what the facts seem to be when I research them objectively, rather than, I I try to explain. I have a, I try to explain that being independent doesn't necessarily mean you side with both sides the same amount of the time. And so we don't shy away from having opinions here. The opinions I express are my own, not necessarily representative of the group, and that's always the case in the FTI. Um, but we're going to talk about some common conservative concerns about whether or not women are safe having trans people. I also want to talk about the bathroom situation because that came up in another event, and I think we came to a pretty good conclusion. I want to repeat it here for the captive audience interested in the topic. Um, So remind me to do that if I don't do it, but I'll try to remember. So next, we're going to talk about what's the evidence about therapy for trans people, or the different types of therapy that are available, um, and or treatments, I should say, because it's both physical as well as mental. Um, and we're open to all viewpoints, not just two. I'm sorry, I pronounced your name wrong, and I'm gonna get it wrong again if I try. But I said Corinne, but I pronounced it wrong. So that said, we're gonna go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So, first, I'm going to talk about the science behind gender-affirming surgery and treatments in general. Basically, there is an overwhelmingly large amount of evidence that gender-affirming surgery is shown significant improvements in quality of life, psychological well-being, and social functioning for transgender adults. I didn't really set the stage, but actually, I feel like Will kind of did. Um, as usual, I didn't have as much time to prepare this as I would have liked, but I did do a bunch of research, but I didn't. I guess I should start out saying, actually, why don't we do this? Let's do a quick. So let's set the stage quickly with a little ChatGPT prompt. Um, So 81% of transgender adults had considered suicide in their lifetimes, and 42% had attempted suicide. In contrast, the lifetime prevalence of estimates of suicide are often much lower, like 4 to 5%. And so you're talking about transgender adolescents being 7.6 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-transgender people. And someone mentioned earlier that there's probably a relationship between the social stigma, discrimination, all of this stuff, and also lack of access to affirming care. We'll touch on that. We'll hit that square in the head in tonight's presentation. And so the first thing I did is I looked up, does affirming care actually help transgender people? And the truth is it does. And there are huge numbers of studies that say that it does. There was one study that I will go into that did not, and I'll explain why it did not. And it actually didn't disagree with the fact that gender affirming care. Well, let me just explain what the study did. Is they looked at, well, I'll do it in the next slide. So basically, patient satisfaction is extremely high. Regret rates are extremely low, close to 1% of people that get gender affirming surgery regret it. And gender affirming surgery is extremely rare with minors, especially under 18. That was one thing that a lot of conservatives told me, well, it's horrible that people are doing this, permanently affecting people with gender affirming care when they're minors. And so I researched a lot about when does this type of gender affirming care happen, and how often does it impact people. So care for minors is usually puberty blockers or hormone therapy, not surgery. to prevent a male to female transgender person from going through male puberty. Um, because once they do, that's an irreversible effect as well. And so basically, out of the very few minors that do undergo surgery, evidence basically shows very high satisfaction rate and improved health. But it's a very small sample size because again, there are very, very few minors that go through surgery at all. And we'll put some numbers to this stuff in a bit. So suicide attempts after surgery, suicidal ideation rates, basically attempted sorry, the baseline rate. Oh, I did cover that. So the baseline rate is 50 to 75% attempted suicide rates, over 30% for transgendered people. And then almost all peer-reviewed research, really all peer-reviewed research says that after gender-affirming treatments, that people's level of suicide goes down, depression goes down, and there are overall much better health outcomes. There is one study that came out in 2024 that said that, and I'm going to see if anyone can find the trick here. It said that adults that had gender-affirming surgery had higher suicide attempt rates than those that did not have gender-affirming surgery. Can anyone figure out, quick raise of hands, can anyone figure out why this might not be an intellectually genuine study? I can tell you why is that they were comparing transgendered people who had gender affirming surgery to non-transgender people who we already said have a much lower chance of having suicidal thoughts. And so, of course, transgendered people who went through gender affirming surgery are going to have higher suicide rates because they start out ridiculously higher and then they ended up just slightly higher than those that had CIS those of CIS gendered folks. And so really that's the type of peer-reviewed study that I literally will never read anything from TriNet X because anyone that would publish a study like that is intent on misleading, not actually getting to the heart of the issue. Because it's completely misleading. It makes it sound like gender affirming surgery increases suicide attempt rates. Whereas actually, if you compare it to the average transgender person, suicide rates went way down. And so this is an example of where the saying "there's lies, damn lies, and statistics" come in. If you want to doctor the numbers and set up a study so that it'll prove your point, you can do that, but it's not intellectually genuine or intellectually honest. It's, you know, ridiculous. And actually, I'll go into why later, why I think that it's so harmful to make assertions like that. And then people spread them and share them thinking that that's really the truth, when really it's not the truth. Comparing transgender people's suicide rates doesn't make sense to compare to CIS. So, um, that said, pretty much all studies that have significant numbers of people in them say mental health benefits are positive. Um, and then I'm going to go to the next suicide rates in minors. So there's not a lot of robust peer-reviewed evidence about suicide rates in minors before and after gender-affirming surgery because it's so rare. There is an indirect study which is looking at puberty blockers and hormone therapy, which shows lower rates of depression, lower rates of self-harm. Suicidal thoughts are much lower than people who don't get that care. So we know that gender affirming care actually helps the mental health of the person who's transgender in a very significant way. Um, and Next, I'm going to go into regret rates. So it's less than 1% of people consistently that regret gender affirming surgery in the US amongst adults because there's not enough data for children to know to be statistically significant. But in adults, it's less than 1%. And out of the people who actually regret gender affirming surgery, a very large portion of those are actually not regretting the surgery itself. There's actually the lack of social acceptance that they're regretting. So it's not the surgery itself that they regret, it's that they're not being socially accepted as being the sex that they feel like they are in the inside. So social rejection essentially rather than the surgery. So the other thing is that gender affirming surgeries are much lower than most other, many or most other elective procedures. And when regret does occur, it usually comes years after surgery, about 10 or 11 years after surgery. So that's worth noting too. So, um, 2021 systematic study. This is more data on the the regret rates. The 2024 study of 220 transgender teens said only 4% expressed any regret. And again, most of them were not about the transition themselves. Um, Surgeon surveys report regret rates of 0.2 to 0.3% amongst thousands of patients, including minors. Um, Most studies have short follow-up periods, which may not capture the long-term regret, but obviously, since I had the metric of a lot of the regret coming 10 years after, then there are studies that look at the long-term effects as well. So then, this is a big political hotbed topic these days. And so I was curious, like, how many people is this affecting when we talk about the scale of gender affirming surgery for minors or gender affirming care for minors, rather. So it's extremely rare. So out of like, um, let's look at so it turns out there were about 2,600 surgeries out of 330 million people per year that were gender reassignment procedures on minors. So that includes all types of procedures, not just like genital procedures, which is actually much more rare. That includes chest surgery. So actually, it's probably, less than a couple hundred in the US per year, again, out of 330 million that this even affects. And we'll get into specific numbers and doing an apples to apples comparison at the end of the presentation. So, um, as far as global child surgeries, there's actually probably only a few thousand at most that happen globally because most of the gender affirming care or gender affirming surgeries uh, Karen surgeries is happening in the US because it's much easier to have happen here. There's more openness to it than there is in a large part of the world, although there are some other countries that are open to it. So, for the number of minors on puberty blockers or hormone therapy in the US, it's 0.017% of youth were coded as both trans and getting puberty blockers. So we're talking about the tiniest sliver of the country that are minors getting gender affirming surgery. But this was when I talked with a conservative, they were so upset by this, just really distraught, very emotional, and like how horrible this is, this injustice. And I think when we talk about why has this become a political hotbed topic, it's because the idea of transgender people can make a lot of people uncomfortable. The idea of permanently, having youth make permanent decisions that could adversely affect them is very emotionally laden. And there was a lot of misinformation posted on social media about this topic, which made people very upset, and rightly so, because if those things were actually true, they would probably make all of us upset. The problem is that, and maybe not rightly so, because the problem is that a lot of it was based on misunderstanding. Because as we saw, all of this um, gender affirming care for minors is actually helping those minors live healthier, happier lives. So for a 5-year study, it found that um, um, basically about 17,000 patients aged 6 to 17 with gender dysphoria, which is the technical name for being transgender, initiated either puberty blockers or hormones in the United States. And it was about less than 5,000 on puberty blockers and for a little under 15,000 on hormones. So globally, those numbers aren't really well documented, but again, the US is likely a significant portion of minors getting that treatment because it's more available here than it is elsewhere. Um, and you'll see that it's not as available here as you might think, even though I say that. So, the puberty factor in sports, another thing that I've gotten people really emotional about is that, there's a huge advantage if you are born male and you go through puberty as a male. The muscle density, the strength of bones, it's all, the strength and speed and stamina are all much better when you're born as a male and go through male puberty because of the amount of testosterone and how that affects the body. So you want to keep that fact in mind for a little bit later in the presentation. Just store that one away because they'll come back to it. And you also want to keep in mind that conservatives are very against puberty blockers and hormones for minors because they feel that it could cause irreparable harm to the children, but also that would prevent a male to female child from going through puberty with uh, uh, basically puberty blockers would prevent a male to female child from going through puberty with male hormones. So keep that in mind for later, and we'll come back to it. So I also saw a picture of a woman that was just bleeding out of her face, like all over the place, and it said that there was a mixed martial artist fighter that went through puberty as a male. And I saw a picture of this woman's face, and I was very upset. I got emotional. I was like, "Oh my God, this is wrong. Why is this allowed to happen?" Well, it was most likely Fallon Fox who fought between 2012 and 2014. She's the most well-known mixed martial arts fighter. There are not consistent rules around mixed martial arts because there are many different leagues and there are no outright bans on male to female transition folks. But it does turn out that less than 1 in 10,000 fighters are male to female transition. And I don't think there are any female to male that they would have a hard time competing. And so there are uh, uh, um, and so there are only about 30,000 mixed martial artist fighters in existence in the entire world, which means that if there are that there are probably three or less male to female fighters, if there are any at this point in time. So when we talk about the size of the quote unquote trans threat in sports, it's almost insignificant, if not insignificant. So I thought putting numbers to things, I like to put numbers to things to get statistics because I do think statistics, when used in an intellectually honest way, can tell us about how real certain perceived threats are. USA Boxing does allow male to female competition, or a male to female competitor to go through male puberty and compete with women, which doesn't feel fair to me because they do have a genetic advantage. They have a big physical advantage, as I mentioned, and that physical advantage will last their lifetime, even if they do pass the required suppression of testosterone in order to compete, which is required for USA Boxing, the USA Boxing League. The USA Boxing is the current set of Olympic rules, but the new set of Olympic rules is going to go through World Boxing's rule set, which says that you can only compete with the sex that you were born as. So it pretty much eliminates any transgender competition in Olympic boxing through the World Boxing's rule set. Now, pro boxing bodies have said that they would create a separate transgender category to allow trans women to go through male puberty to fight. But it would not allow trans women who go through male puberty to fight CIS women. So because there would be a separate category, but there are not enough trans boxers to create that category. So right now there just is no place for trans people to compete in the boxing world. So pretty much no boxers that are trans. Then what about all other sports? So all the other sports are almost unanimous in saying that if someone goes through male puberty, they are not eligible for female categories because of the clear inherent advantage. trans women who transition before male puberty are generally eligible because they don't have that big genetic advantage from testosterone as a youth. So let's keep in mind now that conservatives don't want to allow minors to have access to the therapy that they need to prevent themselves from going through puberty if they're a male to female transgendered person, which basically means even, and this is in spite of the fact that less than 1% of people regret those decisions, and in spite of the fact that it actually helps their overall mental and physical well-being, which immediately says that anyone that's transgender will be disqualified from playing any pro sports for the rest of their life in the female category because they weren't allowed to transition according to if they're in a state where transitioning is or where gender affirming care is illegal, which I'll get into where it's legal and where it's illegal. So, um, what's required? Let's talk about, I heard from again, conservatives said, well, oh, this is horrible. These children are getting gender affirming care without their parents agreeing to it, and schools can transition kids without going through their parents. Well, there is very little of that going on. Really, in order to get gender affirming care, the general rule is that you have to have a mental health evaluation saying that you are persistently experiencing gender dysphoria, meaning that you feel like you are of a gender other than your birth gender. And uh, to be clear, there are no laws saying that gender affirming care is legal. There are only laws saying that um, within certain constraints that minors can influence their medical care in general, and this is considered one of many types of medical care. So transgender is not like singled out in any way, shape, or form by the laws in terms of making it legal. It's just right there with any other types of medical care. Now, parent or guardian consent is almost always required unless the child, basically, it is always required unless the child lives on their own, independent of a parent guardian, or has been deemed like mature enough, meaning like a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old that's been deemed mature enough to make their own health decisions. So those are the only cases, and they are very rare. The age-appropriate interventions are all that's allowed. So I was also told by a conservative that it's horrible how, young, very, very young children are getting sex changes and, gender surgery. Well, actually, pre-puberty, it's only social transition. So there's pretty much almost non-existent to have anything other than that. And in early puberty, it's puberty blockers, mid to late teens, possibly hormones. And then surgery is almost always for someone that's 18 plus. It's not done for minors, almost ever. Now, I looked up the percent of people that are minors that do get gender affirming. This is for care without parental consent. And so it turns out that the best estimates that I could get are that between 0.5% and 1% of trans people actually get gender affirming surgery without parental approval, which means 12.5 thousand trans people out of 330 million Americans. So that's a pretty small number if we're talking about it. Like these are not for me statistics that, especially when you consider that this gender affirming care drastically improves the physical and mental health of the person who's getting the care. Um, like doesn't make sense to me to be so upset about it that these small number of children or minors really they're not children anymore but they're minors are getting the care that will help them be less likely to be suicidal. And remember, there are therapists that are looking at these kids and looking at the risks and saying this child is in a situation where the risks, the benefits outweigh the risks. Um, Next is gender affirming care in the law. Um, basically, we've shown that gender affirming care is highly successful at reducing suicide and depression and a bunch of other statistics that are pretty gloomy, that afflict transgender people. And also, it's worth noting that if a child wants care, the child can only get care if the child wants care, first of all. If a parent or guardian agrees with that care, and a professional therapist gives agreement to it. Now, even in spite of all that, in about half of states, gender affirming care is outright banned. You cannot get it even if all three of those things align. It is illegal for anyone to give you gender affirming care in those states. So, um, that said, I'm going to give some statistics that sort of summarize the pros and the cons of gender affirming care in a minute. But there was a good question that someone asked about, what does it mean to be transgender? And I've had conversations with a fair number of transgender people, and I've shared my hypothesis on what I think is going on with a transgendered person, to try to make sense of it. And I've gotten pretty much unanimous agreement that what I said made sense to them, except for one person who admitted later that they were just pretending to be trans. They were the only one that disagreed with me. Um, so all the actual people who acknowledged that they were transgendered and didn't didn't back out and say that they were just pretending to be transgendered agreed with this. So on other nights, I've given an argument that I think is pretty good, that we have a metaphysical spirit. And essentially what I said to these transgender people, that some of whom were friends and some of whom were just people that I had met and I wanted to test my hypothesis, is that a trans person is a person whose spirit has a different gender than their birth sex. And so if you think about that, it actually explains gender dysphoria. If you are born male, but your spirit is actually a female spirit, and I don't know that the spirit has like a specific gender the way that the body does, but if it has all the attributes that we typically associate with female, and then we have all of these, concepts in society that we associate with female, well, then you can feel very out of place if people are trying to associate you with male attributes or what are traditionally considered male attributes. So that hypothesis has been pretty well received. It's my best way of making sense of what does it mean for someone to be transgender. As far as the emotional case, I think that um, conservatives in the last election for sure picked this case because it's very emotionally jarring. And when you get, I mentioned earlier, when you get emotional, your logical part of the brain stops thinking. And so if enough information was sent out over the airwaves, and I think it was, to say that the transgender agenda of liberals is horrible and you can't let these people get into positions of power, then they felt like it would turn the tides of the election in their favor. And so I think it was a very conscious effort by conservatives not to talk about the many other things that affect all of us in daily life, like unemployment numbers, which are going through the roof right now, about the fact that money is being printed by the government or put into the money supply by the government at a very rapid pace, which is devaluing the money that each of us make and increasing the rate of inflation. And we did a different night where we talked about inflation, and I explained that, and actually it's a very party lines thing. Something like 95% of the money put into the economy was put into the economy by Fed chairs that were put in place by Republicans, which I didn't know until I researched for that event. And I was like, I wonder if there's a party line split here. And actually there was. Mind you, the overlap with presidents is not always the same, meaning you may have a Republican appointee during a Democratic president and vice versa, because usually Fed chairs remain after the president switch, but because the terms are different. But anyway, let me give you my favorite slide of the evening, which kind of summarizes the pros and the cons of gender affirming surgery. So I looked into the effect of blocking 50% of trans people from getting to therapy, which is where we are today. And it turns out if you look at the increased rate of suicide and law of large numbers, and you look at how many trans people are likely to die from suicide attempts because they were blocked by trans from having trans therapy for being transgender, it's about 27,000 people that are going to die in a lifetime from access to lack of access to gender affirming treatment. On the other hand, we have about 5,000 trans people who will get surgery and regret it that opted into it. You have 1,600 trans people that will get permanent effects as a minor and will regret it, meaning, they didn't transition to or go through male puberty and they'll never really have the same body as if they were a male. They regret it. But remember that most of those people that regretted it didn't regret it because they regretted it for social reasons, not for that type of reason. There are and I'm sorry, out of the and there are three globally, there are three potentially mixed martial arts competitors with an edge, because MMA groups, which are private enterprises, did not create a ban on trans people being able to compete, which is very preventable. Just change the rules or pass a law saying it's illegal, right? If that's really your agenda item, just pass a law saying it's illegal. Republicans have been able to pass a law for whatever they want. They passed a law saying that poor people are going to lose all their benefits, or most poor people are going to lose huge numbers of benefits, and that the wealthiest of the wealthy are going to get a huge tax giveaway, and make lots of extra money. But they couldn't, if trans was their issue, why didn't they pass a law saying that these mixed martial artists um, should not be able to compete? And that could easily be passed as a law in the US. Clearly, their agenda is not to, solve what they call the trans problem. They wanted to win the election. Next, there are five trans boxers out of I forget which boxing group was the one that allows them to compete, which is again preventable. Just pass a law saying it's illegal, or ask pressure the boxing organization to change their rules. So if you look at the difference here, we're talking about 27,000 dead people, and we're talking about 6,600 people who may regret something, or and eight people who have an edge in sports. So it's not a hard decision to me to say that, we should make a law saying that trans people deserve to get the help that they need and that they want and that their parent and guardians agree with, rather than the situation we're in now, where you have huge numbers of trans people who are some of the most vulnerable of the population that simply can't get treatment for the issues that they're going through. So that's my presentation. I'm open to questions, feedback, comments, concerns. I also I also welcome independent fact checking and research. So everyone's welcome to do that, and we will do that to you if you make assertions that sound unlikely to be true. We're going to ask you to give your sources. So come with sources if you have disagreement. My sources are all in the presentation, which I will give. I also put both of my LLM conversations so you can see everything that I talked with the LLM about, and that's where all the sources are, because it was just too much time to copy and paste all the sources into the presentation. So I'm going to put the presentation in the conversation in the chat. And then I'm also going to say, please limit comments or questions to one comment or one question at a time. Limit the length of that comment or question to 2 or 3 minutes. If you want to respond to what someone just said, whether it's the other person, the person with their hand up, or me, or anyone else that speaks up, you're welcome to just jump in. I encourage people to just jump in, ask thoughtful questions, but try to keep the topic on the same topic that was brought up and keep it to under 20 seconds per time you jump in. And then we can have like a fluid conversation even amongst a group of, here we're 35 people, which is great, but we want to have a fluid conversation. So less than 20 seconds, let's keep the conversation flowing. And then once that conversation dies down, we go to the next hand up. So with that said, Garrett Wilson was the fastest on the draw. So Garrett, what do you have to say?
Uh, well, I mean, I think I agree with you on pretty much everything. I mean, I will say the one thing that I think I disagree with you on. You say that it's the metaphysical thing about the spirit, and but I don't know if that's who knows. I would say I read a book. It's called The Goodness Paradox, and it wasn't about the trans issue. It was by Richard Wrangham. He's a primatologist, and he was basically looking at self-domestication in humans. So like dogs. And his view was that trans issues may be related to in the womb, right? I mean, as you develop, you need in order to when you have you have of course your gender is your sex determined by genetics, but the levels of testosterone that you get do have an impact on the like I'm not an expert how exactly you develop and everything. And so he thinks that these things might have a sort of genetic component and maybe a bit of a biological component because people who it's a more of a theory. He didn't lay this out as like, there isn't research. It's just like I think this might be the case. But people who might be trans. So, for example, if you're a man, you have that gender, but you in the womb you might have lowered your testosterone levels might be lower than normal, and it would be kind of the reverse for a trans woman. If that makes any sense. It's been a while since I read the book, so um, it's complicated, but I would say that I lean more toward that in it being a genetic than a spiritual claim. That doesn't mean what you said is not true. It's just
Yeah, no, I get it.
I
You can
like
have a different opinion. That's okay. I will say they've been looking for a gay gene for a very long time, and no one has found one. And I think that the chances are good that it's not a genetic thing. But you know, there are diverse opinions. This is not a decided subject, so um, yeah, you're welcome to believe what you feel is the most convincing. I would encourage you, if you don't believe in a metaphysical spirit, to try to go to the recording on where I defend that we have libertarian free will. And if you find that argument convincing, I can tell you the rest of the story about why I think we have a metaphysical spirit. It's not something I believe on faith, it's something I believe based on logic.
well,
Um,
I think we do. It's just
yeah,
for me I like when I think about statistics, I think about science and not necessarily
yeah.
I'm like a kind of what's that, two pillars kind of guy. Um, if this was
Yeah,
a theological question, then I would be like talking with you about these sorts of claims. But,
yeah.
you know,
Most scientists don't believe we have libertarian free will. Most scientists think that that whole idea is a bunch of nonsense. They're
well, I
compatible.
think they're wrong. But,
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think
But
I think our
we don't
favor
want
is
to
very
digress on that.
limited, but
Sorry,
that's
I don't mean to
beside the
digress,
topic.
but I agree with you, Garrett. So, Will, go ahead.
Thanks, Garrett. No, well, I was just thinking, to me, there's sort of hysteria about this. I don't know why it is. That's one of the most fascinating things about this subject to me, is why we're so hysterical about, like, it seems to be anything to do with sex as well and gender. Oh, we're hysterical about it. So on one side, you've got the really sort of God-fearing Christian belt types that say this is not part of God's plan. This is a sin for a man to wear a dress, and they're super hysterical about it. And then you've got varying degrees of hysteria on the right, about, say, for instance, a man wearing a dress, essentially, or, somebody who's transgender, which is different to cross-dressing, I understand. But I think to most people, it's basically a man in a dress. That's what man on the street, average person just has this image of a male that's now presenting as a female, right? And they're kind of hysterical about that. They're scared by this concept because it's so new. And years
No
ago,
one's scared.
Just
and
let it finish if you could, Queen.
I mean, years ago, somebody couldn't say they were gay. It was career suicide. Now everybody accepts gayness, and there's no big deal. Nobody's vilified for it. And then this other thing emerged. Oh, there's also men that are not just gay, but they think they are women or they identify as women, and it's a very real thing, right? It's absolutely real. It's kind of people in the psychological field acknowledge this fully, that children do identify as being a different gender to what what their physical body would infer, and this is a very real thing. But what's happened, I think, is you've got extremists on the left or wherever they are that are saying not only is it enough that we can now identify as women, which the gay people would have loved that, in the 50s and 60s and the 70s even, to just come out and say, I'm gay, hooray, and nobody cares anymore. Well, now transgender people who are real, they exist, I understand, they can do it as well. Say, I want to wear a dress to work and put on a wig, whatever. That's my right. I think that's fantastic. But when it gets ruined, and
Try
I've
to finish your
discovered this
thought.
from, I'll very quickly finish, in the chat, was women do not like, a lot of women do not like the idea of transgender females being in their bathroom, sharing dormitories, like in a youth hostel, there are male and female dormitories. And now you can have a man saying, I'm a woman now and I'm going to use your dormitory, sports, and so on. So I think if everybody just stepped back and kind of not be so demanding that their rights are met, the kids in the middle that are trying to deal with this and who do have the highest suicide
Try to
rate will be
finish your
much
thoughts.
better
You're
off. Thank
40
you.
seconds over the timer.
I'm done. Thanks.
Okay. Corinne, did you
Sorry,
want to
sorry about that.
respond first? Um, so as far as the bathrooms, do you remember what the conclusion we came to was last time about transgender people in bathrooms, Will?
Oh, yeah, well, it's that
Want
we
to share
have,
with everyone?
yeah. I feel like I'm in school and I've got to answer the question, but that's good for my learning. Is that it's unisex bathrooms is the perfect answer.
No, that wasn't what we said. So what we said is that is a good answer. I agree, but that's not what we talked about. So what we talked about is that if I have a friend that's transgender, but you would never know that he was born female. Like you would never know. He's got a big beard. He's like male voice, everything. Like nothing would indicate to you that this person is not male. And if that person walked into a female bathroom, I guarantee there would be women that are uncomfortable. And so what we said is that whatever gender you pass for the most, like you look the most like, that it makes more sense to go into that bathroom so that you make people less uncomfortable. That was the conclusion that we came to the last time.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that because I'm still
Yeah.
not sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
think about it, because like if you don't do that, then you're basically saying someone's going to go into a bathroom where they don't look like the sex of the people in the bathroom. And so that's what people are concerned about. And so the very people that are saying, women should go to women's bathroom and men should be going to men's bathroom, I guarantee any of those women that say that, men should go to the men's bathroom, if they saw my friend walk into the bathroom, they would say, "Why are you coming into our bathroom? You're a man," when really they were born female. So, um, it
Yeah,
makes more sense to me that whatever you pass for is where you probably are the most, are most likely to be able to go. So, or most likely should go. But I think unisex bathrooms is the best solution, to be honest, Will. So I like that the best.
there's also dormitories just came up in the chat, which I never thought of that, and lesbian bars as well, because transgender women are going to lesbian bars apparently, and lesbians don't like that apparently. So it's complicated.
Well, it's hard to general. I like to say the only generalization that's generally safe to make is that generalizations are generally unsafe to make. So you can't really generalize about all lesbians liking or disliking transgender people going to bars. But that said, I want to go to Paul. He's got his hand up next. Paul Kaplan?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Hello. Well, first of all, I want to start with a framework which I think would be helpful to understand some of these things. And that is there's a threefold distinction between sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So sexual orientation is about who you are who you are attracted to. Gay men live in are very happy, generally, happy in their male bodies. They have no desire to be women. Very few would put on a dress. Some might cross dress, but I'll get to that later. And of course, there are some that maybe do drag shows, so they put on a dress when they go on stage, but when they're off stage and the rest of their life they're dressed just as in men's clothing. So that's a common misconception that somehow gay men want to be women or want to be feminine or anything that nothing could be further from the truth. Gay men are male or males generally.
Wait,
Gender identity, which is where the question of trans comes in. And I know you use the word spirit, Garrett, which I found that kind of a distraction, honestly. I know you gave a reason for using it, but the way I've heard it explained is simply gender identity is how you perceive yourself. And if you are in a male body and you perceive yourself to be a man, then you are a cis man. Um, you know, if you are in a male body, but you perceive yourself as a woman, then you're a trans woman. And there's another possibility too, which you didn't mention, which is being not non-binary having a non-binary gender, people who perceive themselves as being neither male nor female or having characteristics of neither a man nor a woman or characteristics of both men and women. So that's a different dimension than sexual orientation, and those two really need to be kept quite distinct. They're quite different. And then the third one is gender expression, which is how do you choose to express yourself with respect to gender, like, particularly when you're out in public, what kind of clothes do you wear? And that could be different than your gender identity. That could certainly, and it certainly tells you nothing about says nothing about a person's sexual orientation. A person could have a straight sexual, or a man, you can have a straight man who maybe wears dresses in public.
yeah. So one thing to comment, I know you said that gay men are always men, but at least I know, some gay couples have male and female roles in their relationships. And that's not to say that there's gender dysphoria necessarily, but that there are, you know, maybe it's more complicated than simply all gay men are, tough guy gay, guys. So just want to put that out there. But I appreciate your putting the definitions out there between sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And I think that's useful for terminology for us to use tonight.
If I could just say something in response
Sure.
to that,
Of course.
because to say that two men are who are in a sexual relationship, to say that one's male and one's female, or one's a man, one's a woman, that's actually kind of offensive.
No, no, that's not what I said. I said that my friends would say about themselves that one of them is in the like has more of a male role in their relationships. So I don't think that you can say what my friends would say about themselves. I don't think you have that right. I can communicate to you how my friends describe their relationship. That's how they look at it. Now,
Okay, I've
you
never
can
I've
say you
never heard that
disagree
before.
and you don't think that they're right for seeing their relationship that way, but they're allowed to see their relationship that way if they want.
Of course, they're allowed to see their relationship any way they want and choose to express it any way they want. I would not extrapolate from that a general notion of male and female,
That's not the
these
only case of that I've seen. So I
okay.
know multiple people that would put it
Okay. I never
this way.
never simply I simply
Yeah.
never heard of that.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, that's
okay.
the whole concept of like having a butch lesbian girlfriend is that very idea. So it's common parlance in society that that's a known concept. So I'm surprised if you've never heard of that, but maybe you haven't. So thank you, Paul, though. I appreciate the definitions. That was very useful. Leon, shalom.
Hey, hello. Thanks for a great presentation. First of all, I'm I'm curious, like, one thing that I would like to explore, and maybe it's not something that there's a lot of info about, but as I was hearing it, and I was curious about this the issue of gender dysphoria and gender in general. Like it's also influenced a lot by social perception of things, and I'm kind of curious if there's been research directed towards understanding like different societies, do they really have similar rates of suicide without gender affirming surgery, and how perception of what should a man be like. I think that sometimes a society can be very restrictive upon what a man should be, and that can influence like a person to think, well, I'm not those things, so I should be a woman. Uh, and maybe there are some people that really are women, like you said, like something spiritual. But I think that also some of them might be pressured by society into thinking that they couldn't possibly be a man. And I'm kind of curious if there's been research oriented towards how those things can influence uh, these issues.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Leon. I think that the male-female stereotypes are so ingrained, like not necessarily the traditional 1950s, like male has to be the sole provider stereotype, but the ideas of what we think of in terms of like the things that would cause gender dysphoria might be so, you know, so ingrained in society globally that I don't know if there would be enough data for a study like that, but I think it would be fascinating to discover more about that. I think you're asking a good question, but I don't know of any research there, and I'll try to ChatGPT it and see if I can find any. You may try that as well. You'll have more liberty to do that during the event than I will.
Thank
Yeah. It's a great question. The other thing I wanted to mention is someone said that transgender stuff is a modern phenomenon. Actually, there are lots of
No, it's not.
ancient sources of transgender behavior. There were actually priests that were transgender, and so there's lots of evidence that transgender people have been around, pretty much since written history and probably before that. But it's not a new phenomenon. It's just that it's more societally acceptable to talk about it these days than it was in the past. Although in the last, since the last presidential election, it's been less acceptable to talk about it in some respects, or at least to talk about it in a rational way. So I'm trying to buck that trend here. So that said, um, Garrett, go ahead.
Uh, yes, I I have two points for my 2 minutes. So, my first one is I think that like we have to understand that like human society is pretty conservative, right? I mean, and I think that in European societies, Western societies anyway, the norm between men and women, at least since probably like the 18th century, maybe the Reformation, it's been pretty kind of I mean, it changes a little bit, but it's been pretty hard that there's a male female divide. And so I think that, part of the problem is if you've been like this a couple 100 years and there's a lot of change, I think people tend to, react against that. So I mean, because for most people, transgender was kind of, they were invisible because society suppressed. Um, so yeah, and I think the reason why it's become so an issue is that I mean I think conservatives are like particularly good at causing more panics. Liberals can too, right? So I don't want to. If there are any conservatives in here, but conservatives always tend to prey on these sorts of issues, particularly in regards to when things are changing, because they're usually more traditional in the American context means like the 1950s and more of a strict definition. So that's what I have to say there. I also thought the bathroom conversation was interesting. Um, and I know it's not the topic of conversation, but I lean more toward you, personally, Garrett, I mean, because my view is like I sort of live in love if you should go where you gender you identify, and most people won't even know. I think where it gets complicated is in public, so in like venues for sports and you know, stations and whatever. That's the easy thing to do, right? I think in issues where it's a bit more private or let's say less public, like schools or you talked about lesbian bars. I think it's a lot more complicated. So I think there needs to be laws around that. Finally, I think that something that Paul was getting at is you could have said is there's a difference. I think what you're getting is gender roles with the gay men, which is different from like sex or gender affirming surgery. There's often gender roles in marriage, and we expect that for better or worse. That's just what I have to say.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, I want to actually back up. You said you feel like conservatives are better at causing panic or fear. I don't know about that, but what I can say is scientifically studied, and I don't know if this is causation, and I don't know which direction the causation would go, if it is causation or it's correlation. But studies have actually shown that conservatives. Oh, look, I beat myself. I forgot to pause that. Studies have shown that conservatives have larger parts of the brain that are sensitive to fear. So there is more of a relationship, at least a correlation between conservatives and more fear inducement than there is with liberals. So that, and I will say, like, I see like all of the arguments that I heard from conservative friends and people that I've discussed with that were conservatives this topic were fear-based. They were all like, I'm worried about this person, or I'm worried about my children getting. Oh, that's another one that I didn't cover tonight. I had some people tell me that they think that trans people are out to convert other people to become trans, that it's like a spreading disease. And
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if that was even worth including in the presentation other than to say I have yet to meet anyone that has ever heard of an actual person that was trying to convert anyone to be trans. And I don't think any trans person would do that because they wouldn't wish that fate on another person necessarily. But because it's a hard life to live, to
There's a book,
so
it's
socially
called The
different.
Righteous Mind, um, by I think,
Jonathan Haidt.
yeah,
Yep.
and he talks about the difference between conservatives and liberals, and I mean, I read it for it was like a moral philosophy class,
Yeah.
and I think that it's worth interesting because it will maybe answer some of your questions. I mean, not that the other views on this, but he seems to be the one people said. It's certainly the one I read.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, if that's all you want, we can move on to the next person.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks.
Civilian leadership and the military. One that's
Okay. I guess that was not for us. And I'm sorry, pronounce your name again. I said Corinne and I was wrong. So, Corinne?
Yeah, that's how you pronounce it.
Oh, I did. Okay. I got it wrong the first time and then I was insecure about being able to say it right. So go ahead, Corinne.
I mean, I'm not really sure what to say at this point because there's just been just numerous like instances of misinformation and things just being entirely framed incorrectly. I've addressed a lot of it in the chat, but obviously people want to ignore anything that they haven't heard before that they can't immediately figure out how to shoot down.
Why not
And
pick one topic that you feel like is the most
I mean,
important?
that's why I know I'm right, but
Why not pick one topic that you feel like is the most important one that you feel like there was a misunderstanding and try to explain what you believe was communicated and what you think is the truth.
I mean, even just like the whole thing where men want to decide, like, oh, unisex bathrooms are the answer just because you feel that women's and girls' concerns don't matter to you because you're not one of us and you don't care to like actually listen or empathize. Like, that's just like
So help me
insanely
understand,
like
help me
arrogant.
understand,
It's like,
help me understand why unisex bathrooms don't show sympathy or compassion.
well, I really don't want to like focus on bathrooms either because there's actually numerous same-sex spaces, and for some reason, everyone wants to also ignore the rest of them and ignore like, women actually getting raped in prison, for example. Um, of course, like I've actually heard people say that like that's normal and okay, and like those men's feelings matter more. Their feelings that they're a woman and don't want to be in with men matter more, and then they go and rape women that they're locked in with. And then people want to be like, oh well, the prison guards rape women more. Okay, well then have female only prison guards for female only prisons. It's a very simple solution. Making it worse is actually clearly not the answer.
I like your solution there.
Like
Yeah.
what
I
do we
didn't,
like? And then if people identify as trans like really feel that they're so at risk in prison, they can have their own prison wings. They don't need to impede on women's same-sex spaces. But they don't want to have their own stuff. They want to violate women's rights.
so help me understand why we started on bathrooms and then we focused on something else. Help me understand the
Well, I
bathrooms
told
thing.
you I didn't want to focus on bathrooms.
Okay. So you're saying that that transsexuals should not be put in prison in the same cells as non-transsexuals.
I'm saying that all women's and girls same-sex spaces need to be respected.
Well,
We have that right to have
what are
our own
the
spaces, and it's not up to anyone else to decide that we shouldn't have that. It's not up to other women to consent for other women and girls either that we shouldn't have that. If there's women and girls who want that, then that's what we deserve.
so it seems like you're saying that just because someone wants something, they deserve it no matter what. Wouldn't it make more
No,
sense?
it's our basic human right. Men are 99% of rapists and 90% of murderers. I shouldn't even have to say that. No, no, none of us should have to say why we need our own same-sex spaces. It's obvious.
Well, I'm not saying that you don't need your own same-sex space. I'm just trying to understand your perspective. And it sounds like what you're saying is that trans people should not be in jail with non-trans people in the same cells. Is that correct?
I really don't care. All I care about is that men are not put in with women and girls.
Well, when you say men, are you saying that a male to female trans person who's on hormone therapy,
Yes, you cannot change your sex. It's not possible.
um,
Physically not possible.
so you don't respect the decision of someone to feel that they're of a different
You can't
uh,
decide to feel that you're something you're not. That's not a decision. You can't like
you can't tell someone else to decide how they feel, right?
okay, well you can claim that you feel something that's not a feeling and that's never gonna make it true.
Well, so what is your thought about gender affirming treatment?
What do you mean? Like what about it?
Like, should it be allowed or should it be banned?
I mean, I don't think that there is treatment that affirms gender that isn't therapy that helps someone accept their sex, their actual sex.
When you say their actual sex, you're saying the sex that they don't believe that they are.
Um, I mean, if they're trans, it's
Right.
generally the case. Although some of them do actually believe that they are their sex, because there are different ideologies and viewpoints within trans ideology.
There are different viewpoints, but the whole definition of trans is believing that you feel more naturally the sex that you were not born with. That is the definition of trans. So I'm not aware of a trans ideology that says other than that. If you have one, please put your source in the chat, and Carl will bring it up if it's valid.
Okay, I mean, I didn't really say anything against that. I just said that like some of them actually acknowledge their actual sex, even if they don't want to be that sex.
Well, everybody acknowledges what sex they were born. That doesn't mean that they
No, not
feel.
everyone does actually. Maybe you're not familiar with all the different ideologies in the community, but some of them actually claim that female refers to males who want to be female as well, which makes no sense because then what does trans even mean?
Well, that
Like
doesn't mean that they don't acknowledge
the
the sex
trans
that they
isn't
were
even like
born.
an actual isn't even a thing if you think that way.
No,
Well,
that
they
doesn't.
do. I mean, it doesn't make it's contradictory.
Well,
But
that's what
people
I'm
have
hearing.
said that.
I'm hearing that you're saying that a male to female person, you're saying that a male to female person will claim that they were not born male. Is that what I heard?
Yes, I've heard that from numerous people in the
Can you put a source
community.
for that one as well? Because I've
Like
never heard
literally
that.
going back to like when I was actually in the community and identified as part of it. And this is why I left because
Great,
they could never make anything make sense. And
great.
I'm a very intelligent person,
Source.
so
Put that
clearly
source.
it's not lack of intelligence.
Put that source in the chat, and
How
let's
are you
go to
gonna
the
have a
next person.
source for the opinions of people in the trans community? You have to go talk to them and find that.
I've talked with dozens of trans people,
Okay.
and I've never heard that. I mean, every trans person I talked with acknowledged what their birth sex was. They just don't feel that
Okay.
they relate to their birth sex.
Those are the people you've talked to.
Yes, and so I'm
I
asking
don't
you
know how I'm
to post
supposed to
a
immediately
public
find
source
the
for someone
source
that
of
does not acknowledge their birth sex.
So it looks like we reached a point where it's a he
Yeah,
why
say,
would
she
I have that
said
on
that
here.
it's not going to be resolved. So maybe we
yeah.
can move on
So
to the
we'll
next.
go on to people.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kareem.
I'm just making a
And
comment here.
yeah,
So when you talk of transgender people, if you look at some East Asian religions, so they have been transgender people from I don't know 2000 years ago.
yep,
So this is not nothing new.
I agree.
And also most of the time these people were harassed, were abused.
Yeah,
Okay, gay men being categorized as a third gender due to homophobia is not some legitimate thing that we should be trying to emulate.
gay men being what? I'm sorry.
Categorized as a third gender is not some legitimate like part of culture that we should be trying to emulate. It's homophobia.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Because the so-called evidence that there's been trans people throughout history is these third genders where they decided that gay men aren't men out of homophobia.
No, that's
No,
not
that's
actually
not.
accurate.
No one has
Try,
identified as
Yeah,
the
yeah.
opposite
do me a
sex.
favor. Go into your favorite LLM and write about ask it to tell you about historical examples of
What
transgender
is it?
people in
I don't
ancient
know what an
times.
LLM is.
Like
Uh,
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT. How
But
about
I
ChatGPT?
don't use AI. I don't do that.
Okay, then Google
well,
it.
I can
You,
get I
you
can
can
give you
find it in Google
examples.
too.
Yeah, well, I've read about these historical examples. That's
You're not
why.
referring to one, at least
Well,
not.
but they're not
Okay,
gay.
do you want to talk about the Hijras of India? It's homophobia.
No, you have examples of historians like Herodotus speaking about the people that used to dress like women, etc., and they didn't have
Yeah,
homoerotic
that's the
relations.
thing.
It doesn't have to do with homoerotic relations. It were people that were adapting the usages of another sex.
Also, the whole concept of dressing like a woman comes from misogyny because that's what gender roles are misogynistic and prescribing different like oh women have to wear these certain things like it's literally misogyny. It's not okay.
So let
Yeah,
me
I
send
agree.
so let me
Sorry.
send you a link to one of the religion called Hinduism, one of the oldest religion. I basically did chat GPT on this. Has a deeply inclusive view of gender and identity. So that's what I'm talking about. That this is nothing new. And if you look at the history, these people have been abused.
Okay, women and
Have
girls
been
have been
used.
abused, but y'all don't care about that. So,
Why do you think anyone doesn't care about that? Why do
Yeah,
you believe that?
well, it's just obvious when you
No,
prioritize
no, it's actually not obvious at all.
certain
Why don't
people
you
over
explain why you believe that?
women.
What did people say that made you believe that? Help me understand.
It's everything that like everyone said, essentially. Like you're clearly prioritizing one group. You clearly think of
The
them as
topic
like
the
it's
topic
just
tonight, Corinne, is trans people. So we're talking about trans people because that's the topic of tonight. You're changing the topic to women and whether or not people believe that it's okay for women to be abused. That's not tonight's topic. No, no one ever made a
that was
mention of it.
not my point. Like my whole point is that these things are inherently opposed to each other. Women's rights are inherently opposed to trans ideology. So like
Why do you think that?
it
what is trans ideology in your opinion?
I
I'm
mean,
not sure
like
I've
Why
understood what
does
you like
exactly you mean.
literally already proposed that we don't deserve same-sex spaces. Like clearly you're putting trans ideology over women and girls.
so would you rather my female to male trans friend walk into a female bathroom, or would
That
you
has
rather?
nothing to do with what I said.
It
Like I
does.
said, I
Oh, it's
don't want
directly related. Just because
no
you
it
don't see how it's related is a different story, but it's very related because you're
all
saying
I
women
care about
deserve.
is that there aren't men in women's spaces. I don't care what she does. She's a
Well,
woman.
if she's going into she walked into your bathroom, you would say this is a female only space. But if he walked into your
I
bathroom,
mean,
you would say
it's a
it's a
big
female only
assumption
space.
also to
And you
assume that
would
I
please let
can't
me finish,
tell.
Corinne. Corinne, let's be respectful and let people finish when they're talking.
You're
If
assuming that
he
my
just let me finish, please. Politeness includes not interrupting people. The next time you talk over someone, whether it's me or someone else, I'm going to mute you. Thank you. Someone already did. Or you muted yourself. So if he walked into your female only space, even though he was born as a woman, you would say, you're interrupting my female only space, don't you think?
actually I would not feel safe to confront a man in a vulnerable place like that.
So in other words, you would feel uncomfortable that a man was in your room, even your bathroom, but even though it's a female only space, and he was born a female.
If I somehow couldn't tell that this
Yeah,
is a
you would
woman,
have no, I
then yeah,
guarantee
but
you, I
that
would bet you
has
$1,000 you could not distinguish if I put you in if I put
but that's
50
not the
men.
point.
What's
It's
that?
also just it's that's not the point, and it's also just not so black and white that this woman has to go into women's bathrooms because of what I said about men not being in our
You
bathrooms.
said you want to have a
You do
female
realize
only space.
like trans identified people who are men or women can both go into men's bathrooms. They can both go into family bathrooms. None of them have to go into women's bathrooms.
Right, but the point is you're saying that you want a female only space. So,
Okay.
you have to either have it be a gender neutral space, or you need to have someone that is born as a female that is now transitioned to male coming into either a male
She's not gonna
bathroom.
go into the bathroom and start telling everyone, well, oh, I'm actually a woman, even though like I don't look like one apparently. Like this is just like a ridiculous hypothetical.
It's not a ridiculous hypothetical. I have this friend, and this is you're
Yeah,
saying
again, like if she wants to go in the man's bathroom
it's a
because
he.
that's if she wants to go in the men's bathroom because that's how she wants that
So,
because she
so
wants to be a
Corinne,
man. That
Corinne, one of our rules is to be polite. The polite way to gender someone is to gender them the way that they prefer to be gendered. So I'm going to ask you to follow that rule, and I'm warning you right now that that's an important rule. So if he decides to go into a female bathroom, I think you would be upset. And so the point is that it becomes a very ambiguous
that's
situation.
not politeness to me. I don't agree with that.
I don't care if you agree. I'd like to take a public opinion. Does anyone here think that
So,
calling
so
someone a
what,
gender other
what,
than their own gender is polite?
so what I think is that right now we are talking about transgender people. So basically, what she's doing is she's trying to violate their rights.
She's trying to say there needs to be a female-only space where only women can go. But what I'm
Yeah,
saying
but
is that my
yeah,
friend, Corinne is obviously misgendering him as a female, and in misgendering him as a female, she's essentially saying that my friend should go into the female-only space. But clearly, she wouldn't like that. So it shows this
I
contradiction.
didn't say that.
You didn't say what?
No, I think that she said that women should have their space, but it doesn't matter anyone who is either by appearance or by nature not a woman shouldn't go there because anyone can go to a men's space. Men shouldn't have their gender, their sex only space, but women should. Something like that.
What if someone is a female to male and or a male to female and they come into Corinne's bathroom? Now, are they allowed to, say that she passes for or she passes for female? You end up with the opposite problem, right? Where, the person
Yeah.
has to go to a female bathroom when they weren't born female. Or a male bathroom and then you get the idea is that if you're going to say someone has to stick with their birth gender, then you end up with problems. It gets confusing. Sorry. It's been a long day. So the point is you can't just expect people to stick with their birth gender or you end up in this situation where people are very uncomfortable in the bathroom. And so you end up with this situation where the best I think you can do when you have gendered bathrooms is to say whatever someone passes for the most, that's the bathroom they should go in. But that leaves a lot of ambiguity still, right? What if someone's kind of in the middle, right? Then I guess you should be able to go to either one. But really the best thing to me is to give the ability to have bathrooms be non-gender conforming and let men and women go into whichever bathroom, which a lot of places are starting to do now. But anyway, I want to let Layla go because she's had her hand up and been patient.
Hi, Garrett. Hi, everyone. I would like to bring back the conversation to the
Please.
yeah, gender affirmative, affirming treatment. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And also on the point of getting a parental consent for minors to get it. And I just want to say that it just makes sense to me. So let's say I have a child who's 15 or 16 years old. And I would need to know what kind of treatment my child is going to go through, in and out, like what kind of side effects he or she would get, and also like long-term consequences, and also like all the financial
Yep.
burden that might pose on the household.
Yeah.
So if it is on a minor, it just makes sense to me that the patient should get a parental consent. And I just wanted to say
And
that.
they do have to get parental consent in 99.5% of situations. The only type of
Mm,
situation that they don't need parental consent is like, let's suppose the child is very suicidal. Their parents don't accept them as transgendered and told them they should just start acting like their birth gender and stop, messing around and are abusive and punish them for acting like they're anything other than their birth gender and that person goes to their school people and says, "Look, this is what's happening to me at home. Can I talk to a therapist?" And they get a therapist. The therapist says, "Oh, you know what? This is seems like an abusive situation." They try to understand, they try to resolve, and there's no resolution, right? It's 0.5% to 1% of trans people that get any gender affirming treatment without a parental parent or guardian agreeing with it. So it's super rare
mm.
that that happens.
That's a relief to know. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for doing it.
You're welcome. And if you talk to the average conservative that's been watching social media, they won't think that it's the exception. They'll think it's normal. And it is not normal.
Mm,
And I actually thought it was pretty normal too, until I did the research for tonight's event because I'd been told by so many conservatives that this is normal. It's happening all the time. And it turns out it's almost never happening. Very minute percentage of the population.
mm. Yeah, thank you for the information.
Yeah, thanks, Layla. Good question. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I put something in the chat a little while. Oh, Garrett, you're leave. Oh, wait. Garrett, I put something in the chat about same-sex couples, which I just got from Google, and I don't know if you've had any time, if you've been reading the chat or not, or during our meeting,
I
but I
can't
think
read the
that's,
chat while I'm hosting, so Carl can read the chat. If you want to say what the source was, I'm happy to.
well, I just did basically a Google, you type a question into Google and it says AI says.
Yep.
So that's all I can say about the source. I don't know what the source of the source is.
Well, it's better to use a version that gives you the sources. You do web search in ChatGPT and it'll tell you the sources. Let me more.
Normally, Google also has some kind of a small link next to it if it has a source and it's not just summary of a million things.
So let me give you a source that explains what I was talking about. If you, it's Wikipedia, and it talks about the butch concept, which is again pretty, pretty mainstream knowledge, I think, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
I think among I think with lesbians, you do hear the term butch.
Yeah,
You do hear that term, but as far as gay men are concerned, um, as far as I can tell, what you were talking about was this kind of
um,
was not. I don't know how common it is because
here
I
you
guess
go.
I've
This
heard
is
it
the male
before.
version. Top
Okay,
bottom switch.
yeah, that well, top bottom has to do with anal sex. It doesn't have to do with the roles of being men and women in the
It,
relationship.
Sentence number two says they may more broadly denote psychological, social, or sexual identity or indicate one's usual preference. So it can be more than that, I think, but
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, I was just following up on that. What I wanted to say that in regards to our current conversation is, what we're talking about is gender dysphoria
Hmm.
and whether it's real or not.
Yep.
I think that's a fundamental point of disagreement here, and and I know, obviously you've been looking into this, so you know all the sources, I'm sure. How in the, how in the psychiatric and psychological professions, gender dysphoria is recognized as a real condition.
Correct.
And also, if a person has gender dysphoria but they haven't done any kind of transitioning, they would still be called a trans person. So being trans is not conditional on surgery or hormones.
Correct. Absolutely. Anything else you wanted to say about that,
That
Paul?
was it. That was it.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely right. Leon, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. So I just wanted to comment on the issue of gays and male female because I think there is a significant difference there because uh, from what I know in the community, like it's really it's more fluid and and part of the whole thing is that they can really um decide it's really an issue of the relationship and the dynamic and it's how they decide. So they're not, I don't think they're actually identifying in an essential way as a different gender. So I think there's a difference there. Um, yeah, that was the main thing I wanted to say. And also, I think it's like a pity that this debates or conversation sometimes get derailed into like this essentialist thinking, maybe, or I don't know that. I don't think that. I do think it's kind of absurd to argue that you can't have like there's an identity that you couldn't possibly uh, have a different identity from your birth sex because it's just a fact that it happens. So I think it's kind of closing your eyes to say no, you can't possibly have a trans identity. But so I do think that thinking about it should be more oriented uh, towards I don't know if to call it solutions, but the way we deal with it. Like it's like is the gender affirming treatment the only way to deal with the issues raised by it, and what other issues does it present? But which is obviously a very complex issue. But I think it's just um, yeah, misdirected when we try to impose our definitions on other people.
And what do you mean by that? To impose our definitions
Like,
on other people?
well, I mean, like, like gender dysphoria, like you said, like it's an actual thing. Like you can't erase it by defining it some other way. You
They're
can't
saying
talk
it
about
doesn't
what are
exist.
the best ways to, yeah.
Yeah,
You can't talk about what are the ways to confront it.
right.
I think that's
Which is what was done with trans people for millennia, is that it was, considered so, you know, so unacceptable that it was people pretended it didn't exist. And
yeah,
the
but
same thing was
filtered
done with
away.
homosexuality for millennia. And then first homosexuality became more mainstream. Now transgender is becoming more mainstream. And so, yeah. Um,
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
cool. Steve, go ahead. Steve Heisel, you're on mute.
Wow, I thought I hit the button, but it didn't unmute. My apology, folks. How do we assign a birth to an individual when they're born with both sets of parts? They have a full functioning
Oh, it's called
uterus,
intersex.
but don't. Okay, do they have that on birth certificates now?
I
No,
don't
but
know.
they're diagnosed with a specific condition which falls under either male or female. They're never a third sex because there's no such thing.
That's not true. There's
That's not
plenty
true.
of
Yeah.
examples of hospitals where
Yes,
the
each
decision.
condition can be defined as occurring in either males or females.
How
It's
about an
actually, if you actually
XXY?
look at it,
Person has
Okay,
XXY
listen.
chromosomes. They
yeah,
have three
so that's
chromosomes,
Klinefelter
XYY.
syndrome. If you look into Klinefelter syndrome,
Please,
it's
Corinne,
known as a syndrome that occurs in males.
In hospitals, when someone is born with
You
both
haven't looked into
sexes, the choice is made by the parents. The doctor asks the parents which gender would they prefer the boy to be. Sometimes parents decide not to and to keep both, but this happens a lot in hospitals. And it books
Yeah,
are
they often don't diagnose a condition till later in life.
not diagnosing, it's
But
about choosing which, if the parents would like to make the person choose male or
okay,
female.
well, if you can't obviously tell, then there's a condition that needs to be diagnosed.
Exactly. And if you've there's been a
So
lot of memoirs written by people who have been assigned the wrong sex at birth by their parents and they regretted it ever since. That's
yeah,
not
it can happen when people don't understand those different conditions and don't know if they fall under male or female.
we're talking about people who actually went through it. You were talking about empathy and about understanding and actually talking to people who actually went through it. There's been many books
Okay, I don't know
who
what
have
your
gone
point
through
is.
it, and it's just a matter of being aware of that. That's all.
I am aware of it. I'm very aware of the specifics of these conditions that fall under male or female.
Well, but you're ignoring the evidence from hospitals, of which there's plenty. So I don't understand why
What
you.
evidence for what?
And science as well, because a person
Evidence
can
for
have
what?
both parts
Corinne,
from birth.
I want you to imagine a thought experiment here. Just like this is a pure imaginative thing. You are born as a baby, right? And through a genetic, lottery mix up, you're either, I'm just going to use the both sex one. You're born with both genitalia. The doctor sees the baby, doesn't know whether it's female or male. At that point, you clearly see
That's
both
really not how it works.
genitalia. It is. There's plenty of evidence.
It's called
Okay.
Okay,
intersex,
and
Corinne.
again,
You can look
intersex
up.
people are all either male or female.
That's
Yes,
not the
sometimes
point.
doctors don't know right away and they
I
have to
know
get
that's my
diagnosed
point.
later
I
in
agree with
life.
you. Right. I'm.
Wait, wait, wait a moment.
What is the
Guys,
point of
guys,
Corinne,
guys,
saying
guys,
that?
guys.
Corinne,
Calm
so
down.
What
if
Calm
point
I
do you
down.
think
understand
you're
you,
making?
Guys,
I
if I
can't really
understand you
hear you.
correctly,
wait, I'm gonna
now,
mute
now,
everybody who's yelling. Everybody who's yelling, we're gonna calm down. We're all getting emotional here. Let's relax. Okay. So when someone is speaking, let them finish speaking. Let's keep calm, cool, collected. And um, I think it's worth noting that some people have both female and male genitalia from birth. So when the baby is inspected in the hospital, they have both female and male genitalia, right? That's what's known as intersex. And so that's what Carl is saying, that when they are inspected in the hospital, that the parents and the doctors decide which sex are they going to assign to them on a birth certificate. I would
And
argue that's a lack of nuance in the birth certificate. There should be an option of intersex, but
No, there shouldn't be an option to
I
lie
think,
about the sex of the baby just because you don't know it.
how can you
then
know?
in your
think
next life you're going to be
Corinne,
a
I think that
you're going to
you
be a
just
doctor in a
disagree.
hospital that has to decide those births, and then you're going to get.
I think you disagree with the way doctors are currently we define sex, and I would like to hear what you think is the correct way. Like, you mean it's the genetic evaluation, or what? When you say no, people are wrong. This is not undecided. This is this specific sex.
Right. What would
What
you
exactly are
decide?
you referring to?
Yeah. What would you decide, Corinne, if a baby has both male and female genitalia, what sex would you give them?
Again, I would do exploratory testing to figure out which specific condition they have and then diagnose that condition and then understand, does that condition occur in males or does it occur in females?
What are the
And then we'll
possible
know the
conditions?
answer. It's that simple.
You mean which genetic mutations they have, and then some should be assigned
Both
by
the
their
female.
DNA?
Oh, she's
Yes,
she's
they're all specifically defined with names.
it's
Yeah,
called
All
but
these
intersex.
conditions.
that doesn't mean that that's what defines sex. I mean, genetic.
I don't know what you're saying.
So there was a really
I'm
famous
saying
book.
that in a medical sense, when they have both genitalia, they're defined in a certain way that they can be intersex because this is a phenotype. It's not. I mean, it seems like you're saying no. We should go by genotype, like by genetics, and this is the only correct definition. But that's not the medical definition because that's not the only thing that defines what the person is physically. Like if you have both genitalia, then you clearly have.
What condition are you talking about when you say both genitalia? Name a specific condition.
There's
It's
no
called
condition. There's no
intersex.
There are
condition.
several.
Yes, there are.
Well,
There's
well,
specifically named disorders. If you don't
Yeah,
know them, then you
but
just
the
can't talk
baby
about
is
this
well,
born.
you
topic.
The
can call them
baby is.
genetic variation
You've
instead
never
of
even heard of
disorders,
Hang
Klinefelter
on, Leon. Hang on,
syndrome.
Leon.
Why are
Let
you
Corinne,
talking?
let Corinne, let Corinne tell us the different conditions. Go ahead, Corinne.
Yeah, I wish I still had that one infographic, but the ones I know the most about are Klinefelter syndrome, Turner syndrome, 5 alpha reductase deficiency, and there's one more off the top of my head that I'm forgetting the name of. Oh, Swyer syndrome. And I'm sure no one's here has heard of any of them, so it's kind of pointless to like
Turner syndrome
argue
definitely
back and forth
isn't
if you're
what we're
not
talking
informed.
about. But
Well, you're
So
just, if you're not informed, then you're not, and you should go look
no,
these things up. So.
you're missing the point that we're trying to address here. We're not talking about the syndromes. We're not saying they don't exist. I may agree with you, Corinne. What I'm talking about is that when a baby is born, at like 5 seconds after they come out, and the doctor realizes there are two genitalia, which means the baby could be male or female, and there's no way to know, right? You come up with maybe the causes or whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the parents have to make a choice on the birth
It
certificate
doesn't
whether they
matter
want to
to
reproduce
diagnose someone with
male
the condition
or
they have.
female.
Corinne,
And my
please let
point is,
Carl finish.
so my point is that there's been many memoirs written by the people who experience it themselves, right? So I believe there was a famous bestseller, I think it was on the Oprah show, I think it was called David or something, I'm not 100%, but it was told from the point of view of somebody was born where you couldn't tell what sex they were. The parents basically said, I'm going to choose female or I'm going to choose male when he was actually female inside. And he grew up being like, male, but feeling it female inside, which is the whole point of transgenderism, right? When you feel
Oh,
different
that's a very
from what
different
it is.
thing.
And if you don't
Being
agree with
mistakenly
that,
raised as the
Go
if you
ahead,
don't
Carl.
agree with that, you're going against everybody who's experienced it firsthand, which is not empathetic. That's it. And all it takes is for you to understand the people who've gone through it rather than going, well, this is what I know, this is whatever. Just be empathetic and listen to other people's experiences who've written books about it, who've talked about it. So when
yeah, I have and you haven't.
I just told you I have, Corinne. But
Also, I
you're
don't
missing the point
understand.
about being empathetic.
What do you think I'm not being empathetic to or not agreeing with?
Well, because I'm mentioning something that has evidence, and you say, well, you don't know anything, Carl, and I know. So you're already discounting it, right? That's not empathetic. That's
I said that intersex conditions exist and they are specifically defined conditions. It's not a catch-all of randomness.
Nobody said anything about a catch-all of randomness.
Okay, I don't know what point you think you're making. I'm not denying that intersex people exist.
Right. Okay. All right. It
So
looks like
I don't know why you think that.
not a failure to listen, but maybe a failure to understand, I guess. So I guess maybe we should move on
Maybe
then.
you're just not actually making a point.
But you are, Brand, you are saying they have to be male or female at birth.
I'm saying people are male or female at birth, even if a doctor can't tell. Just because you can't perceive something doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That's correct. You're right about that.
And you're not acknowledging somebody might be both.
They're not. All of these conditions fall under either male or female.
Actually,
You
Steve,
can't be both. That's
yeah, Steve.
insanely like unscientific and illogical.
No, it's actually not unscientific and
Again, we're
illogical.
talking
It's
about
the idea of a spectrum is definitely not unscientific. It's actually like how most biologists see it these days, not binary.
All right. So what's the conclusion of this meeting, Garrett?
Well, I think to be honest, I think we can kind of go back to let me go back to the key slide to me, and I'm curious. I forgot to do a survey of before and after. But let me go back to this slide. This is really the kicker, right? If right now we have 27,000 people alive today that will commit suicide in their lifetimes because they were blocked from getting trans therapy. And right now that's because it's illegal in half of states. We have, by allowing trans therapy, the bad part of it is that there might be 5,000 trans people that get surgery and regret it. There might be 1,600 trans people that have permanent effects as a minor who regret it. Um, Again, the regrets are usually not because of the gender affirming treatment. They're for other reasons like lack of social acceptance. So for me, I'm curious if there's anyone that thinks, in spite of this, that we should still not make trans therapy a federal law where it should be always able to be applied for transgender affirming treatment that it should be a law that gender affirming treatment should always be allowed to be provided if the parent, the child, and counselors all agree with it. I would really like to hear a reason that
So
someone thinks that shouldn't be the case.
yeah, Garrett, if I'd like to understand a couple of things from this slide.
Sure.
Um, is there any data about people who are trans but choose not to get surgery?
So
In
yeah,
other words,
that's how they discovered that the suicide rates go down for people who get gender affirming treatment.
okay. And then the other question too, because I don't see the connections here, is that will every one of these trans people who do not get surgery, will they automatically commit suicide later?
Not automatically, of course. What I'm
Okay,
saying is if you take the percentage that will actually commit suicide that were blocked from treatment, this is the
right.
number of people that die. This isn't saying that every trans person blocked from treatment will die. It would be a much higher
Oh, so
number,
you're saying for sure 26,000 people who have been
27.
blocked
But
from it will commit suicide?
I mean, by the law of large numbers, that out of all the people who are alive today, 27,000 trans people will commit suicide during their life because they were blocked from getting gender affirming surgery or
Okay.
treatment. Yeah.
Because I've heard from some sources that not everybody chooses to get surgery, even though they are
Correct.
identifying
No,
as
this is
different
just
things.
treatment.
It
It's not
doesn't
always surgery. And it's fine to not get treatment. And those people aren't even in either side of here, right? If someone is
right.
trans and chooses not to get any treatment, they're not in either side of here because there's no
Got it. Yeah,
downside, there's no regret to them getting a treatment, and there's no harm from them getting blocked from treatment because they weren't going to get treatment in the first place.
I understand.
I'm only
So
talking about the people who will be blocked from treatment, and out of those people that will be blocked from treatment, how many of those will commit suicide in their life?
So if I understand your position, your concluding position is that transgender people who would like to get uh, surgery should be able to.
Yeah, they're the only ones that can get therapy. Like, no one can be given trans therapy. You can't go to a mental hospital and get given trans therapy without your treatment, like your permission. You can't go anywhere. They can't force trans therapy on you. The person has to opt into it, and the parent and guardian has to agree with it 99 to 99.5% of the time.
Got it. Okay.
So
Seems
is
like
there anyone that can make a good argument for not legally giving everyone the right to gender affirming treatment after seeing the slide?
that's common sense to me.
Feels like common sense to me. Once I did the numbers, I was like, oh my God, people have this all wrong. Like people are, wanting to block, gender affirming treatment. But to me, this slide says the whole story. I guess I could have started with this and made it a 2-minute lecture, right? But kind of helped
Yeah,
to
that's
give the story. But
but really, I mean, it's kind of like what I mentioned in the beginning. Really, I think the question that I'd really like to understand, and I think Will mentioned that earlier as well, which is why is this such a big issue? Like I'm
yeah,
trying to understand the issue. Why is it so,
I think
it's
it
like
was
we
a
get
way
LASIK
for
surgery for our eyes,
A
right?
way
Like we
yeah.
to
can't see a
increase
LASIK
misogyny on both the
surgery.
left and right.
Okay,
Said it 5 million times.
Corinne, trying to understand something does not equal misogyny. 100% every time. Every word that's come out of your mouth, sorry to
That's
say,
not what I
has been,
said.
we're all misogynists here. We're all unempathetic to women's
That's not
problems.
what I
Hang
said.
on, Carl. Carl,
That's
let's
exactly what
let's
you
hear
said.
out. Carl, hang on. Let's hear out. Go ahead, Corinne.
Yeah,
What are
go
you
ahead.
saying?
Um, the reason it's such an issue is because it's the catalyst for increasing misogyny on both the left and the right in different
What do you
ways.
what do you mean
Okay.
by that?
And that's why misogynists want to have this issue, have people take these positions in this issue because the main positions are both misogynistic positions, as I've been saying this whole time.
Help me understand how
I,
you connect gender affirming surgery with misogyny. How do
It's the
you
whole
relate those two?
ideology we've been talking about the whole time. Like that requires like a long essay response. It's really not fair.
We have 10
We have
minutes.
10 minutes. Yeah.
Also,
No
back
hands up.
back. I want to make one note about the other thing because I don't know like what people are thinking, like what you're actually envisioning, where you could be born with both a penis, clitoris, and vagina or something. Like you can't even be born with a fully formed penis and a fully formed vagina. That's not a thing. So,
Oh my God.
but
Okay.
I mean,
I
again,
guess
like
you need to see
people
evidence of
want
that.
what are you
Okay. My
talking
point
about?
is
I've
not
done
that. Here's my point. If I can finish my original point. Um, no, I mean, serious. I was, you're interrupted and you say, and then I said, okay,
Hang
not
on,
everything
Carl.
is
We have
even
another
misogyny.
hand
like
up.
this is like
And
the
I said, and
literal
you
like
said, no, I didn't mention misogyny, and you mentioned it like 10
the
times already.
intersex advocacy website
Guys,
even
So
guys,
admits that.
I wanna
please
I
make
wanna
finish my point.
Carl, hang on, Carl. We have Citrine that has their hand up. I'd like to let them have a chance because they haven't spoken yet. So
Yeah, and this is my overall question.
yeah.
Since you all are in between gripes, how much is, yeah, because that was
Go
my
ahead.
overall question, because I just want to be empathetic and
Yeah,
understanding. I don't want to misjudge anybody because
yeah,
everybody deserves a right to be on this planet. You
agreed.
understand?
Yep.
So it's not about, oh, we shouldn't accept them, oh, this and that. But my overall question, one of my first ones, how much is dysfunction and how much is a part of the individual identity?
So
Okay, and Korean is proven that is more, it might be more dysfunction, but that doesn't mean everybody.
well, when you say
So
she's proven
and
it,
another thing, as a woman who has bared 2 children, mammograms and all that, you can have all the sex change you want. You're not going to be a woman. We're a whole nother level. And it's no disrespect to what's necessary for the individual and those who need that, or that validation. It's no disrespect, but you're not going to be a woman. It's just not going to happen. What is a woman? Everybody just not going to be a woman. I'm honest. I'm being sincere about this. You're not going in for a mammogram and being squeezed to death. You're not bearing a baby. It's not going to happen.
but Arnold Schwarzenegger did it, Citrine.
But a sexual violation,
Sorry.
anybody is a sexual violation, whether they're homosexual or they're transgender or the female or the male. Being disregarded, disrespected, violated is that. It
Right.
does not change the feelings and the insult to injury just because your gender is different. So that's why I'm trying to find the space. But yeah, a lot of it is dysfunction. I don't think, it's a fad. Some of it is a fad.
Why do
And
you think that?
it's just too much going on.
I actually kind of agree.
Listen, let me say this: the scarcity of good men. Okay, let's keep it real.
I actually agree with Citrine and her point about the dysfunction part, because I was going to, in my finishing from my previous thing, I was going to give this analogy, which is, let's assume you're born with some bad vision and you're tired of wearing glasses. You should have the right to get LASIK surgery if you'd like, and not be blocked from getting LASIK surgery. What I'm trying to understand is, why does everybody have such a big problem with eye surgery?
Well,
That's the problem everybody's having right now. Okay, oh no, you should be okay with the eyes. Your eyes are just a dysfunction. So you should not get surgery. You should not get LASIK surgery. Why are we having such a problem with sex reassignment if that's the choice of the person?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Carla,
should be the age of as a mother, I wouldn't want my child changing no sex until they're 21. If they decide, I've been through school, I've had experiences, I still want to change my sex at 21 years old, then you go ahead and do it. But you're not changing no sex at 14 and 13 and all this mess going on, and you're going to make that kind of serious decision.
Yeah, they can't do it without your permission, Citrine. So it can't be done without your permission until just let me finish, Citrine. Until they're 18, by the way, they are legal adults at 18, and you're no longer allowed to control them legally.
Yeah, well, I think it should be 20. I think everything should happen at 21. Sex should happen at 21, drinking, marijuana,
Good luck with that
driving,
one, Sachin.
gun
But
laws. You know, it's just too
but
much.
if they only have having experiences at 21, then how can you let them decide?
Everything should happen at 21. Leave the house at 21. Everything.
Citrin
College.
should run for
But
Congress and help make the laws the way you want him to do.
So, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Garrett, you in one of your slides you showed how rare surgery is on minors.
Yeah,
That the most minors could receive puberty blockers, but they're not going to get
almost never will get surgery.
they'll
It's
never,
like
yeah,
a couple hundred people in in the whole world,
yeah.
a couple, maybe 1,000 people in the whole world in a year.
Yeah, and this is an important because one of the attacks on trans people is to say, "Oh, children are are undergoing surgery, surgery," and they're not. That's just false. Um, but to get back to the question, why why this big issue? And I think what we're seeing right now is what we've seen this movie before many times over, is that some minority group gets targeted, and that's how I see it. I just
Yeah.
see this as I see trans people as a persecuted minority.
I think I would agree with that, Paul. I think that's an accurate read, and that I think that trans was taken up as an issue. I showed, like, first of all of this stuff, no matter what it is, it doesn't affect any of us personally. It only affects the people who are trans, and at most the people that they're fighting with in MMA or boxing, which, by the way, was less than 10 people in the world. In the world, less than 10
Many
people
women
that
and
that
girls are
affects.
being affected in a lot of ways.
So, Corinne, you're welcome to speak up after someone else is done, but please don't talk over people. You've been doing that all night. And I'm going to continue to mute you when you talk over people. Go ahead.
It's clearly not just in sports that women and girls are affected, and the fact you want to keep insisting that we're not affected because you just don't want to listen doesn't make it reality.
Help me understand how you're affected if a random male to female person gets gender affirming surgery. How does that affect you personally?
That wasn't even the question at hand.
That's what I was asserting, and you were saying I was wrong. So help me understand how someone getting gender affirming surgery affects you personally. My point is that gender affirming surgery only affect, or gender affirming treatment, I'm sorry, only affects the person getting gender affirming treatment. Why should we block someone from getting treatment that will reduce suicide rates drastically, reduce depression drastically, and there's almost no regret for? In fact, the number of people that die is like more than 10x the number of people who regret.
Yeah, well, there's no evidence that people don't regret, and then also like y'all want to turn 1,000 children a year into the somehow 1,000 equals zero now suddenly.
No,
So
but there's 27,000 people that are going to die by not getting gender affirming treatment.
there's no
So
evidence for that.
there is.
That's the
There is.
reason.
All my sources are in the slides. So go to the end of the slides, go to the LLM
Yeah,
notes,
I
and
saw
you
that
can
you
look up
wrote
all the
that, but
sources.
there's no evidence that that's the reason that they're dying.
well, that's pretty much the same for any illness. Like you normally get correlation until you can do experimentally. You really go to to do in vitro experiments about something. But generally, when you see such a correlation, you accept that there's something going on.
And dismissing 27,000 just because a few of those, or maybe even 1,000 of those, were not suicide because of the situation, that's wrong too.
Literally, less than 7,000 people will regret getting treatment, and 27,000 people will die because they didn't get treatment. So my question to you, Corinne, is why would you not give treatment?
I don't accept that those are accurate numbers.
Then look them up and look up the
I
sources
have.
that I
I
gave.
think that the studies are faulty in the way they conduct them. They don't
So
look at
all
10 years post-op.
all
It takes
studies
it takes a
there
lot of
I
people
did
many
include
years.
studies that looked past 10-year post-op, by the way.
Ultimately, if I may interject with a little bit of Socratic dialogue 101 here, which
Yeah.
is somebody says there is evidence and the other person says there is no evidence. It's up to the person who says there's no evidence to maybe try to find out if there is and come up with some other evidence that contradicts the other one instead of just saying there isn't and then
Well,
move on. And
technically, it's up to the person making the assertion, which is me, to give the evidence. I gave the evidence, and now
right,
it's up to
exactly.
Corinne to prove
Right.
that my evidence is either incorrect, which she claims that all of the studies looking at transgender people are wrong. But that said, I want to let Paul go.
I
It's
didn't say
nine
no.
o'clock, so I'm going to close. I'm going to close out shortly. But go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just quickly, people who would say that they should not be getting gender affirming treatment are the people who would say that there's no such thing as gender dysphoria.
I agree with you.
No, I don't. But we're almost finished. But
Or
I
they
don't
would
think
say that.
it necessarily means the same thing, because you could accept that there is a condition, but you could still think that there are. I mean, and
I
again, it's
experienced
hard.
it.
It's hard to disregard really like such data about. You shouldn't disregard such data when it's something so critical as suicide rate. So
I
definitely,
mean,
I think that you should accept that for now it's like a necessary measure, but I don't think it necessarily means that you can't research or look into other way. Like, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the only solution and the only possible thing to look at. You can accept that there is a condition, but still think that we might be missing things that
yeah.
that could help.
Part of the FTI, the second intention is to always keep an open mind that we may learn new truths, right? And so, yes, let's always keep an open mind, but we also have to make decisions now. And I would much rather have less than 7,000 people regret gender affirming surgery and save 27,000 lives. But I want to
I
hear from
definitely
Bart
don't
because he
think it
may,
should be black. I definitely don't think it should be black. I just
right.
think that there is a trend maybe towards like not accepting research that goes in other directions, and I do think that's problematic. But I definitely don't think there should be blocked legally that treatment when it has obvious health benefits. But that's
Great.
kind of
Bart, go ahead. I'm going to give you a little extra time because I've been waiting to hear
Yeah,
from you
thanks
all night.
for staying on this long, and thanks everyone for the chat. Thanks, Garrett.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly say, my position is that I'm informed greatly by these two therapists, Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad from the podcast Gender, A Wider Lens, and they are two therapists who predominantly their clientele are adolescents who have gender dysphoria. And what, the conclusion they've come to, and just makes sense to me, is that if you can find a way to live with gender dysphoria, or examine it, take time to examine it before jumping into medical procedure, not necessarily surgical, whether it's pharmaceutical or surgical. Um, your life will be easier in the sense that it's a world of complications. And that's, I'm not even going to go into bottom surgery. Like, it is complicated, very to be on pharmaceuticals the rest of your life. And it's, this is so, people like say, oh, conservatives say this, conservatives say that. Well, there's some like people who are in the field who are not conservative who are saying these things. And, it's, I guess part of what they're saying and what I'm saying is not everyone who says they have gender dysphoria does have gender dysphoria. There are often not comorbidities, but a confluence of other things going on. but yeah. So I'll just put that out there. Just and yeah,
Yeah, and I
the rest
agree,
of the
Bart.
discussion has been interesting.
I agree, Bart, and actually the science shows that most people don't get gender affirming treatment. So most people are doing exactly what you say, Bart, and they're
Mm.
understanding themselves, and that's what counselors generally I think recommend is that, you need to be really, really sure, and they make people very well educated as to the effects of gender affirming treatment. The people who are getting it are the ones that are really definitively like, no, this is me. This is my authentic self. I'm sure about it. I don't have doubts. These are people who are very certain that they are not the sex that they were born in. They don't feel like they're the sex they were born in. They feel out of place in their body, is how it's been described to me. They feel out of place in their body. So this is the type of people that are getting gender affirming treatment. And if you haven't talked to them, I recommend going to your favorite online forum and trying to befriend some trans people and get to know them better. Most of the trans people I know are super ethical, very friendly, and just generally really nice people if you treat them respectfully. The problem is they don't get treated respectfully often enough. And so that said, I did run long. I'm coming, and I'm getting back in. So thank you all for the great comments and conversation. Thanks for everyone calming down and keeping us back to calm, cool, collected. I appreciate that. Thank you for the diverse opinions. I appreciate having diverse opinions. That's what free thinking is all about. We want diverse opinions here. We want to hear diverse opinions. But I do have to put my kids to sleep. So, Corinne, did you want to give a last comment?
I wanted to respond to, I think it was Paul, who said, like, people who are against this don't believe in gender dysphoria. I said I was the sister in the beginning, so clearly I'm not denying gender dysphoria.
Out of curiosity, Corinne, do you think that people should not be allowed to have access to gender affirming treatment?
That has a lot of other implications regarding governmental systems and authoritarianism. So,
But let
um,
me let me
I'm
just
not.
I know you were questioning my
I
statistics, but
don't even want.
let's suppose you fact checked my statistics and you found that actually 27,000 people will indeed die from being blocked from gender affirming treatment.
You can't prove that that's the
No,
reason.
but just assume that that was true. If that were true and you found it to be true of your own research, would you agree that everyone should
It
be
doesn't
entitled to it?
make sense. That it can't be true. It doesn't make sense.
Okay.
I mean,
So I'm
like,
going to leave it at that, and I'll encourage everyone to go in
people
the notes
killing
and look at
themselves
the
because they have
assumptions
a
made.
mental illness and they
Look at the
struggle.
assumptions made in that. And again, thank you everyone for coming. I think it's actually a very conservative assumption, but yeah,
People
just
don't kill themselves because they can't get a surgery that they don't need. That's not the reason.
I encourage you to do some more
Or
research there,
hormones
Corinne.
that they don't
Hope
need.
everybody
I've
has
done plenty
a
of.
good rest of your night. Thanks everyone, and I will talk to you again hopefully next week. Take care. Bye bye.